Well, ahead of the elections in May, a huge amount of conversation around the importance of your vote and the role you can play in shaping our future. Professor Parmi Natesan is the CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa. Professor, good evening, good afternoon to you, and thank you for your time. You talk about the importance of our vote. How do you think we should think about our political choices ahead of the election?
Good afternoon, Stephen. Yes. I've been thinking a lot about how we encourage citizens to come out and vote in this election. I think it's really important that us as ordinary citizens do whatever we can to change the trajectory of the country. So I likened, if SA Inc. was a company, what would the governance structure look like? And that's where I feel us as voting citizens are akin or can be compared to the shareholders of a company who are voting in a board of directors, that board of directors ultimately being Parliament. And I think it's very important that every one of us comes out and makes that vote. One of the most important rights that shareholders have is that their ability to choose a group of people to direct an organization who are ethical and effective. And I think it's important enough for every one of us to come out, even if people are feeling despondent and don't know who to vote for, etc. I think sitting back and not voting is not the answer.
It's often tempting to compare how our politics works and how corporations work. I mean, in a sense, we're all shareholders in South Africa, aren't we?
Yeah, well, it's not directly comparable because in an organization, shareholders have obviously bought a share into that entity. So there's been some financial capital gone into the entity that gives them that right to vote. But I think it's close enough in that shareholders essentially, or the citizens essentially, are at the end of the day need to reap the benefits of what the country has to offer.
It's interesting to see how recently, and I think there have been some interesting examples of this, where our corporates, our companies, seem to hold people accountable more quickly than our politicians do. I mean, if you lie on your CV to a corporate, you're out of there, you're gone. I don't know if that happens in our politics. I never thought I'd sort of say this, and the politicians won't like me to say this, but are there some lessons they can learn from you?
Look, I think there are a number of items of accountability which need to be improved. I mean, the one you mentioned now is just around an individual doing something that's possibly illegal, possibly unethical. I think there's much more market forces in the private sector that would have that individual removed than they are in the public sector, and we see it quite often. I think there's a number of other things. If you take this governance analogy that I made, if we consider that Parliament essentially is the board of directors of SA Inc., in any other governance structure out there, if a board of directors wasn't overseeing an organization sufficiently, wasn't acting in the best interest of the organization, if the organization wasn't performing, that board of directors probably would be removed at some point by the shareholders. Similarly, if a CEO and executive team, and I'm going to say here that in SA Inc., the CEO would be comparable to the president, and the executive team would be comparable to the ministers in each portfolio. An executive team in a governance structure would have a strategy that the board, Parliament approved, and they annually would have a business plan, budgets, targets, key performance indicators that they need to meet in order for this organization to perform and in order for them to essentially keep their jobs. And I think there's also a tremendous lack of accountability because I, as an ordinary citizen, don't know what the targets are every year for each of these portfolios with the budget that they've been allocated, whether these targets are ever reached, how the individuals stay in the positions that they're in.
I suppose the question also is you need to, as a corporate, you need to have trust. I mean, politicians also need to have the trust of voters. It's quite interesting to look at that.
Absolutely, that's true. I mean, when shareholders are voting in a board, they're voting in a group of people that they trust to oversee this entity in the best interest of the entity, not in the best interest of themselves. And similarly, voters would need that when casting their vote in these elections.
Thank you very much indeed. Professor Parmi Natesan is the CEO of the Institute of Directors in South Africa.